Eğitim Enstitüsü'nde Politika ve Uygulama Okulu'nda öğretim üyesi olarak görev yapıyor. Eğitim Enstitüsü'nde Uluslararası Değerlendirme Merkezi Direktörü. Joe HARA 2010'dan 2016'ya kadar Dublin Şehir Üniversitesi'nde Eğitim Araştırmaları Okulu Başkanlığı yaptı. İrlanda Değerlendirme Ağı'nın bir yöneticisi ve kurucu üyesi aynı zamanda. İrlanda Yetenekli Gençlik Merkezi Yönetim Kurulu üyeliğini yürütmektedir ve Avrupa Eğitim Araştırmaları Derneği Başkanı. Şimdi okul değerlendirmesinde yeni gelişmeler, güçlükler, yaklaşımlar, fırsatlar başlıklı sunumunu gerçekleştirmek üzere Profesör Doktor Sayın Joe HARA'yı alkışlarınıza kürsüye davet ediyoruz.
Final one was in my own language, Irish, and I promised the translators I will not say anything else in Irish for the rest of the presentation. I'm here watching the technology team and making sure it works before I start. Thank you, Anthony, for being the guinea pig on that one. Yeah, it's working great, thank you. So, what am I here to talk to you about today? What I'm interested in, both in terms of my own professional life and the work that I do with the European Education Research Association, are broadly around questions of quality in education. Now, if you talk to anybody about education, even if you listen to the excellent presentations we had prior to the break this morning, a lot of the conversation we have in education discusses the idea of good education, of making education better, of improving, of quality. And I think one of the challenges that faces those of us who work within education is, well, firstly, how do we do that? But maybe more importantly is, how do we define that? And part of what I want to look at today then is maybe the emergence of a mode or a way of thinking about quality education from a structural perspective. And that's really in and around school evaluation systems and more specifically around ideas of school inspection. And the argument I'll make, which people may or may not agree with, is that there's an increasing evidence within a European context, and I think that's important, of increasing ideas of convergence around how we think about school evaluation and inspection, but that this is being challenged and will continue to be challenged by some of the issues that we've just heard about now, conceptualizations of information and data, and also ideas coming from wider society about who and why we have the importance of why we have quality in education. So a little bit about me. I work at the Centre for Evaluation, Quality and Inspection at Dublin City University in Dublin, Ireland. I'm delighted personally to be here in Ankara because we have an ongoing formal relationship with the Faculty of Education here through our good colleague and friend Shakir Chinker and also other colleagues. And we've been lucky enough to host people from your faculty within our university. And again, working in this area. So we have close connections in that practical way. A second role that I have is I'm currently president of the European Educational Research Association. The ERA, as we call it, is an association of associations. We have 42 different member associations coming from 32 different European countries, and we have approximately 20,000 members represented by our member associations. And at our core, and our fundamental idea is that we are professionals engaged in research for the benefit of education and society. And again, I think as a mission, this sounded very close to many of the introductions we have both on the faculty here and on the university here. And I think it's something that as professional educators, I think we can agree about. That one of the reasons we have a scientific research community so well represented in the EJERCongress and in your incredibly comprehensive program is that we're doing this not for our own benefit, but we're doing it for the broader benefit of society. And this is at the heart of the ERA message as well, and it's one that we take very seriously. And within this, ERA is made up of, we have 33 professional networks. And relating to the topic I want to talk about this morning is, even within ERA, at least 4 or 5 of our networks immediately discuss the issue of quality. At their centre is the question of quality, whether it be around improvement, whether it be around assessment, whether it be around policy studies, organisation, whatever concerned is that this is a core idea that we have within it. And I would argue, as I said a moment ago, that educational quality and the broad discourse and conversation around it is one of the dominant themes that we face in many ways, in many of our education systems. And one of the reasons for this, and I think it's one of the challenges that we face perhaps as educators and researchers, is that we have to think about, well, why is this happening? Why are we so interested in educational quality? I think one of the original ideas is that we're interested in educational quality because in and of itself it is a good thing. If as societies we choose to invest time and energy in education, into the preparation of teachers, into the establishment of structures, or even personally, if we offer our children to an education system, we want to assume and we want to ensure that they get the best quality education possible. And I think that has to be a given. But I would suggest that over the last 15 or 20 years, there have been broader national and international trends that have brought this issue of quality to the fore. And a lot of these are based around issues around comparison, internationalization, globalization, the increasing redefinition of education as not being a social good, but being maybe a social and an economic good. Education being thought about in the context of economic development as well as social development, and the capacity to compare ourselves to other education systems. And that's a very positive, and I think it's a very welcome trend in one way, because it allows us to have some sense of where we are. For example, when I was in school in Ireland, we always told everybody that we had the best small education system in the world, which was fine because you could say that because we had no way of knowing otherwise. When I met colleagues from Denmark, they used to tell me the same thing. Now we have PISA and we have different comparative structures, and it's hard to make that thing. So there is a good leveling there, or a good leveling off in terms of that. So we have this comparative culture. And we've got a comparative culture that also draws on a whole range of methodological and theoretical frameworks. So we speak a lot about evaluation. We think about systems of evaluation as being very important, and virtually all of our education systems around the world, or all of our broader social or governmental systems, have evaluation at the core of a lot of what they do. Can you tell us that what we're doing is good? Or maybe more often it's value for money, it's conceptualized as, are we spending our money properly? And we also have areas around the importance of accountability, that if we are being given resources, time and responsibility, we should be accountable for that. We should be able to stand up and say, well, this is what we're doing with what we've been given. And then they lead into questions around evidence, and Tony's superb paper a few moments ago looked at that in a very broad sense. What does it mean when we think about information, data, evidence, when we try and talk about what exactly it is we're making our judgments on, and then ultimately that's leading into quality. So this is the broad framework within which I'd like to briefly then look at a few things here. So when we talk about quality then, what you begin to see is that almost every education system in the world is beginning to reframe itself. And Shakir, just in his introductory comments earlier on, spoke about how the Turkish education system is continuing to rethink about what it does to a greater or lesser extent of success. But we're all thinking about this. We're all thinking about this in many different ways, whether it be curriculum, whether it be structures, whether it be training, whether it be organization. There's this constant systemic thinking through, well, how do we change what we're doing for the betterment and for the improvement of the systems that we have? And within this thing, or within this conversation, I'd like to argue that one of the key mechanisms that we've identified, or one of the key mechanisms that's increasingly being viewed as being important, within a European context at least, is that of school inspection. Is that a particular process or mode of engaging with schools that allows you to think about how we can talk about quality in education, how we can measure it, and maybe how we can improve it. So these three issues have become clear. So inspectorates then have become very important structures within education systems, within a European context, to talk about what is it what we're doing and how do we improve what we're doing. And most European education systems have these. And what do they do? Well, simply put, they assess the quality of education and they try and hold schools accountable as well. And actually, this is one of the first major tensions within this. Because one of the big challenges when you're talking about improvement and you've got a dual focus, and that's married with accountability, it's very difficult to improve an organisation that you're trying to hold accountable at the same time, because they tend to diverge in some ways. If you're there within a school setting or within an organisational setting and you're there, I'm here to help you get better, but at the same time I'm going to make a judgment about you which may have negative consequences if I decide that you're not good enough, that's a really difficult balance to have, and it's a balance that a lot of inspectorates within the European context are struggling with, and most of them are on a continuum, somewhere between accountability and inspection and improvement. Inspection, I won't go into any detail of this, just to say it's been around a long time. It's around at least 200 years, and perhaps long before that. Some people claim that Plato was the first inspector of education, but I'm not quite sure about that. But it's a long, long time that we'll be discussing this issue. In the part of the world I'm from, the UK and Ireland, inspection has been part of the system since at least the 1830s. And again, it's very, very much in that system, it's been the imposition of centralised control ideas on individual schools. In maybe the more Central European tradition, inspection is a mediating function. Inspection is where schools talk upwards to a national system, and the national system talks downwards to schools, and the inspectors mediate it as well. So that's the second thing. Interestingly, Turkey, and I base my work here on the work of Shakir Chinker and also Gul Kurum, who's done a lot of work in this area. Turkey's a fascinating exemplar in this area, because in some ways it's tracked all of the developments in school inspection over the last 200 years. So, and forgive me if I got it wrong, but the very first one I could find was a memorandum on neighbourhood schools in 1838, which discusses quality, which discusses modes of inspection, which discusses engaging with schools by an external body to make improvements. And it goes all the way through to the most recent amendment of the education law, or the one I found in 2016. And they have all the issues that we talk about: local versus national, accountability versus improvement, the function of education systems, the connection between secular and church authorities. All these things are big issues in inspection. So Turkey is a good example. And perhaps our colleague's final point there is the most important one, that inspection is reshaped according to the changing of educational policy. And that's a universal experience. That's something that's happening all over the place, and that's something that we're doing all over the place. So what do we do now in inspection? Inspection is a really simple idea at one level. It involves observation, judgment, and reporting. It involves somebody observing what's happening, or a team observing, making a judgment, and reporting back. And reporting back, perhaps to a centralised authority, but increasingly reporting in a public setting. And that in itself is a challenge for many schools and many education systems, because you have a situation where judgments about educational quality and a complex school environment are then put into the public arena, and people engage with them, and different stakeholders engage with them. And that can be considered quite challenging. So broadly speaking, that's what it is. Over the last 20 or 25 years, there's an inspection, as I was saying earlier on in my conversation, it's seen as being part of maybe a new approach, what was called the new public management approach, bringing market ideas into sort of public services. The idea that education is very much about making value judgments around accountability structures, and trying to focus on improvement above all else, but having a particular viewpoint of what it means to improve and how to improve. And at a global level, what you're beginning to see is organisations like the OECD in particular are beginning to coalesce around an idea of what school inspection is and how school inspection actually leads to, and you can see the title of this publication from 2013, is Synergies for Better Learning. So they're beginning to make this real connection between the quality of inspection systems within education systems and the quality of learning that we have in schools. And what the OECD has identified are two core aspects of it. You have this concept of inspection, where you have external people coming out to watch what's happening in a school, but then you've got school self-evaluation, where internally within schools, school communities have the capacity to begin to look at what they do and to create what David Nevo, an Israeli academic, calls their own quality narrative. Their own ability to say, this is what we do, and this is why we do it well. So you have the internal mode of evaluation and the external mode, and they're increasingly being seen as being critical parts of inspection systems. And again, you begin to see this here. So if we look at external evaluation, and I hope I don't hit the wrong button here. So you can see this. This is external evaluation within the broader European continent, not just the European Union. And you can see that in virtually every country in Europe, with the exception of maybe some of our Scandinavian countries, and they are a complex reality in some ways, and do their own particular way of this approaching inspection. But external evaluation has become the norm. Virtually every school system within Europe has some form of this. And similarly, when we look at internal self-evaluation, again, it's present in different ways in virtually every education system. So this international conceptualization of inspection has become accepted within a European context and has become the dominant mode, internal and external, meeting together. And the argument I suppose we were making is that this is the convergence bit, that this is a real example that we're bringing together within a broader European educational context the idea of educational frameworks and the idea of an approach to evaluation and an approach to inspection that is maybe separate and maybe different to different places of doing it in the world. So to move on to the second last bit then, well, where's our justification for this and how do we come to this? I mean, a lot of this has emerged from a practice-focused idea. Systems were changed at the policy and a practice level. And maybe there's been a slower way of approaching this from a theoretical perspective. But increasingly in recent years, we're seeing the model of evidence-based governance taking over within inspection theories. The idea that if we're going to engage within some sort of approach to school improvement or school accountability, we need to see it in a broader governance context and also look at evidence as one of the core aspects of it. So Melanie Aaron and Kim Schildkamp from the Netherlands and Herbert Altrichter from Austria, a number of different people are speaking about this idea. And what they're saying is that inspection then, in terms of a governance idea, is part of a broader idea, a broader umbrella. And there's two key aspects of this. One, there's the idea of setting standards within education and measuring student performance against those standards. And the second one is inspection. And then obviously you've got this internal and external modes. So it's trying to move beyond the limited, maybe not limited, but the narrower focus of inspection as a way of improving schools and seeing it as part of the broader set of conversations we have in education around how we might improve things and linking that to increasingly important international comparative studies. And the logic is that inspectorates within their systems set standards. They then collect evidence, and then this evidence is used to help schools improve. And then thirdly, they try to stimulate school and system improvement at the same time. So going back to that balance between the two aspects of improvement and accountability. So expectations through standards, followed by evidence gathering and judgment making, and then system and school improvement as a essential part, but sometimes a byproduct of it, and that's part of the challenge. I have some systems of things there. I won't look at those because they're too detailed. But the point about those was that I was saying that most education systems now have very, very, very complex standards and frameworks of standards. And you have really interesting judgment calls around if a school is reaching a standard in literacy or numeracy or whatever it may be, and that's one of the challenges. And I suppose the ultimate argument I've been making and my colleagues will be making is that we're moving to a situation now where educational inspection and questions about quality are no longer capable of being made by small groups of professionals within a system, but are now emerging into maybe a more co-professional model, where what the argument is that if you're going to improve a system as a whole, and this is one of the opportunities, you need to involve everybody within the system. And our colleague, the Dean from the university we're hosting the conference next year, spoke about, for example, the importance of student empowerment. So one of the key issues in here is, if you're going to talk about quality in schools, do you, for example, talk about the student experience of schools, and how do you do that? Another issue is, if you're going to talk about the quality of schools, how do you involve the community and parents? And the challenge here is to rethink educational evaluation and inspection and begin to talk about it in this context, perhaps around co-professionality. And here again, you have evidence at the core, you have the standards that I mentioned a moment ago, You have inspection that happens when there's an issue within a school rather than just an arbitrary time frame. You try and talk about school improvement first, and then look at school accountability second. And that's a major transition point for a lot of school systems. You talk about improving your schools, because ultimately that will lead to more accountable and better schools is the argument, but politically that can be difficult. You look at schools as whole organisations, not as individual teachers performing or not performing, and that's a big challenge to maybe many systems. You involve stakeholders at all levels, and then you try and encourage school self-evaluation. So at this core is a recognition that schools and school communities can only improve if they're working together. If you atomize them, and if you try and take them apart and try apply and assign blame or reward to disconnected groups, you're not going to get an effective system of improvement. That's the core of this argument. We're co-professionals within the system. And that leads me on to my final piece, which are maybe the challenges involved with this. Firstly, one of the challenges around this is that even though inspection is one of those issues that has been increasingly important in systems over the last 20 years, there's maybe only about 150 or 200 people in the world who regularly write about it. So it's a core system in virtually every European country, as you've seen there, but it's tended to be seen as being a procedural or a policy or a process system rather than one that engages with academic research. And that's a challenge, and I think it's one that we need to problematize that. And we need to bring congresses like this, people engaging with this at a scientific educational research level. So we need to think about this in a more coherent and a more educationally focused way. Secondly, and I hesitate to speak about this in front of experts here, but there's a challenge of data all the time within these systems. There's a challenge of what we talk about when we talk about the context of education. Because if you're going to be making judgments about a school based on data that you've generated, well, what are you generating? Who are you generating? How are you generating? Why are you generating it? Who has the capacity to do this? Who can make this judgment? Is an observed class within a school using a checklist by an external expert more or less valuable than a teacher writing a 2-month narrative of the quality of the education within the schools? And both of those things are used. So what do you give and how do you do this? And how do you decide on these things? So it's a huge challenge in terms of data and how we work with this, and how we interpret it, and how we think about it. And as we'll talk about now, as the Vice Dean said earlier on, the issue of big data, that's a really terrifying one. And that leads us into the third challenge, which is the nature of teaching and teachers. Because a lot of teachers will tell you, it's not my role to be an educational evaluator. It's not my role to go in and gather large amounts of information and data on my students and analyze it and tell you this. My role is to teach history. My role is to teach mathematics. My role is to teach social studies or counselling. I'm not an educational researcher, and at least some of the systems that are emerging are pushing them down that. So if we're going to force or require teachers to do this, then we need to think about how we train them. And we need to think about what skills they develop in their capacity to engage with evidence and their capacity to speak about evidence. The fourth one is technology, which we heard about earlier on. This is just an example from China. In China, as part of a broader school observation system, they have cameras this is an experiment in each classroom, which tracks all the students in the classroom, and every 2 to 3 seconds they can check whether they're paying attention to the teacher or not. And this goes into a centralized computer, and then a report is given on each student's performance. But crucially, that's linked to teacher performance. So if the teacher does not successfully engage the students with more over a specific period of time, then the teacher is considered to have failed. So this technology and the capacity to generate data from technology is going to be with us, and with us even more in the years to come. How do we use this? I'll give you a very specific one. In my own country, wellness, health and well-being are hugely important things. Our Department of Education has realised that virtually every one of us wears some sort of electronic thing on our thing. They now want to harvest this data and see how students in schools are actually exercising, the amount of time they're exercising. And then what will probably happen next is this will be linked to school policies. Are your students getting enough exercise? Because you as a school have said they will be. And my final one is culture. One of the fascinating things about this is, and the OECD has begun to realise this in recent years with PISA, is that for many of us, educational quality is culturally specific. Our ideas and our conceptions of what a good education system is comes from a very specific cultural context. And making judgments at a universal level about systems that operate at a national or a local level is very problematic. So the OECD is now beginning to talk about cognitive and socioeconomic skills, cultural competence. In the UK, they're talking about cultural capital as being part of inspection and standards. But the real issue is here, how do we meet this challenge of universal models of when we talk about educational quality as opposed to local context? And really and truly, do we want to? I mean, is this something we want to do? Do we want to create a model, a converged model? Or are we happy with our own ways of doing things? Are we happy with saying that in Turkey or in Ireland or in the US or in Germany or in Sweden, we have our own way of thinking about quality and this is what it is? Okay, so thank you very much.